This is definitely going to be a very exciting session of discussion between Pete Sletteland and Matt Hollingsworth. Pete is a managing director at Silicon Valley Bank, and those entrepreneurs here, he's the guy to know. He's the money guy. He invests in diagnostics, medical devices, and therapeutics, life sciences. And Matt, of course, has a very amazing journey on how he came from technology into healthcare and what problem he set up to solve, and how he built Carta Healthcare. So over to you, Pete and Matt.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we appreciate all of you sticking around. It's never easy to compete with lunch. And I have the pleasure of getting to talk with Matt today. And also just a huge thank you to TiEcon for putting this together and having us. But so Pete Sletteland, Managing Director at Silicon Valley Bank in the Life Science and Healthcare Group. Sorry about that. So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with SVB. Probably more of you are familiar with the bank after some of the events of last year. But really, we've been providing banking and financing solutions to the innovation economy for over 4 decades now, and I have the privilege of getting to work with companies across the sector that are leveraging AI and machine learning technologies for numerous applications. And one of those really cool companies is Carta Healthcare, and I couldn't be more excited to introduce and kind of lead the conversation with Matt today, who's the founder and CEO. So maybe with that, we can kick things off by kind of you sharing your story.
Absolutely, yeah. So I came to this from a kind of odd angle. I started my career as a high energy physicist, spent 6 years at a lab called CERN in Switzerland, part of the team there that found a particle called the Higgs boson, and been since then doing AI engineering of various sorts, so very sort of technical in nature as an engineer for most of the time. But there was an important thing going on during that time, which is my mom's had lots of cancer. The 5th one was the one that got me interested in healthcare. And first off, she's a great success story. She's still around. She has wonderful sort of quality standard of life. So I have a lot of, more than your average person, I have a lot to be thankful for about healthcare generally, but also got to see some things that I found very interesting. In particular, she has to carry this binder of her medical history around. She's had 31 surgeries and all kinds of cocktail of drugs, and it's really difficult. And I just got to see every time she went to a new care team, she had to spend half an hour reading through this notebook, and they'd turn around, type into the EHR, and then rinse and repeat. Every time that we went to a new care team, same story happened. For those that in the field, it's the H&P process. They just went through it. But I got kind of confused about what's this EHR for, and it was interesting enough that I dug into it, found that the whole system is extremely complicated, and if I wanted to make any difference, I should go focus on it. And so that brought me to Stanford's Business School, focused on healthcare operations, and that sort of started the journey.
Awesome. Yeah, obviously an unbelievable story, and I think from the seat I sit, I'm optimistic about companies solving really hard problems in the industry with tools like AI and machine learning. I'm very optimistic about kind of the future with individuals like Matt at the helm. Kind of switching to Carta, it would be great if you could take us through kind of the initial problem that you went out to solve, and then on the other side of the coin, what were some of the main challenges that you ran into that also might relate to a lot of the entrepreneurs in the crowd today?
Awesome. So the problem we set out to solve is a subtle one. So I want to give a story to describe what happened. So if you go Google my name, you can find a paper that I wrote that's about predicting what surgical supplies will be used in the operating room so that you can make sure you don't waste stuff. For any of you who've seen the surgery, they bring in this huge tray of things. It has this much stuff, and when it leaves the room, it has this much stuff, and all that goes in the trash because it's single-use things. And so our thinking was, if we can figure out what's actually going to be used, we can right-size that and save some money, basically, was the premise. And long story short, it worked out really well. You can read the paper. It reduced supply cost. This was at Stanford Children's by about 15%, which was about $5 million. So it was worked really well. But the key, though, is that sounds like a great success for AI, because that's what was at the heart of it. To some degree, it was. But if you look at the timeline for what it took to do that, it doesn't really sound like an AI success story, because there was 18 months of data collection with the nurse typing into RedCap, which some of you will be familiar with. It's a lot of manual labor to collect the data to go then feed the AI that we were building. It took me about 3 days to build the model, and then about 6 months for it to be, between 6 weeks and 6 months, actually. Some people did it earlier, some later, but it was completely adopted about 6 months in. So this is really a data collection and change management story. Which is the very important part of this is the AI in the middle. None of this could have happened if it wasn't for that. But all the time went into data collection and change management. And so I did more projects afterwards, but all of them had that sort of timeline to it. And so at some point it's just like, well, what's the point if we're spending 95% of our time collecting data? Maybe we should go out and figure out a way to do that with less labor. And so that's how I came to the problem that we're doing here. So what we did is we picked a couple of papers that have been recently published, and we're like, what would happen if we built an AI model to extract that data instead of having nurses go out and do it? We were able to replicate the results of the paper, and we'd say like, hey, this is interesting, there's something there. And someone who saw the results of that project was like, hey, I have a task for you. We have, this is Stanford Children's, so they had 200 people who are sitting there filling out forms all day for submission of these things called clinical registries, which are in turn used to do research and to improve quality. So we have these 200 people. Maybe the thing that you did there could help make that, not those 200 people not have to spend all day filling out forms. We could repurpose their time to actually using the data that they're collecting and improving quality. And that sounded interesting, so we ended up getting a grant from the American College of Cardiology to go out and see if the sort of technology that we built to replicate those research papers could be used to collect data for the purposes of clinical registries. Worked really well, and so now we have a business doing that. So we can, what we do is we work with hospitals to go and collect data for submissions to clinical registries, which this is a $15 billion industry. There's a lot of sort of meat to chew on to help solve that problem. But even more interesting, as you might have sort of heard from my initial motivations for getting into this, I cared a lot about using that data to fix stuff. And so now we have also the other half of the company is this thing that we call Carta Healthcare Labs, which is where we take the data that we collect under the sort of data collection side of the house and use it to fix operational problems like that preference card project or the supply chain optimization stuff that I mentioned. So the problem we're solving here fundamentally is getting structured data, and specifically that can then power other AI algorithms to help solve operational challenges from unstructured data sources like clinical documentation, which is where all the meat is in these sort of things. So that's what we do in a nutshell: structure unstructured data and use it to add value for health systems. Yeah, and awesome summary. I think a couple things that really resonate with me from Matt's story is identifying the problem, but that could really be downstream from what ultimately you need to solve, which in his case was kind of inputting a lot of the data. And then the other key component is really coming with a direct and clear value proposition and making sure that you're coming with that value proposition to the right stakeholder that will ultimately be the one that can help further adoption of these newer technologies. So you were an early adopter, maybe a pioneer of starting to use these types of tools. So what's your vision for Carta as it's more widely adopted and others are kind of catching up to where you've been for a number of years now? Yeah, so the big thing we want to do is make sure that we can power so AI needs data at the end of the day, either to train or to validate, and it needs to be trustworthy, which is an even bigger aspect of this. So the way that our model works is it watches, we have clinical abstractors ourselves. They have a slightly different job. It's not only to fill out the form, it's to actually validate the data that's being generated by the models that we come out with, which gives you a very key piece of data that is needed for making this stuff impactful, which is accuracy. So how good is it at figuring out that a patient is hypertensive upon admission? And sure, you can throw that at an LLM and it'll give you an answer, but you need to know how accurate it is so you know what you can use it for. Like for instance, for the submission to registries, you need that to be a 98% greater accuracy, where the relevant metric there is something called inter-rater reliability. So if you ask a clinical expert versus what the model says, it needs to be greater than 98% to be valuable. But not all use cases need that necessarily. Like maybe the model is 95% accurate by that metric. And if you're doing it in aggregate to train a model, it's just a source of noise. And if you have enough data, maybe it's okay. So what we can do is not only tell you like what the model can do in a very specific clinical direction, like this clinical concept, very well defined, signed off by all the specialty societies as the definition for hypertensive upon admission. We can say how accurate we are at getting it, and also if it's accurate enough for your use case, provide it to you not only for the registries, but for anything. Yep. So really we want to be the engine here to produce this structured data that can be used to train all these awesome models that people are working on, and also do some of that ourselves.
Awesome.
Well.
Awesome. Yeah. And maybe kind of switching the conversation more toward the audience. I think when you hear buzzwords like AI, machine learning, there's no lack of shiny objects, problems that you can solve in areas that you could apply these technologies where you can create value. But you obviously have a very interesting perspective from your background and having, I think, real success in finding that niche. So it would be really cool to hear kind of your view on emerging use cases for AI, generative AI in your field. And then maybe beyond that, are there specific areas that you think would be cool to have other entrepreneurs try and solve?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think I am of the camp, just to sort of place myself here, I think that AI can really revolutionize things and can provide a huge advantage in solving like one of the biggest problems for me that I want to make sure that we attack is the fact that we spend almost 20% of our GDP on this, and by all studies that have looked into this, about 25% of that is wasted. So it's that waste that I feel like AI is really well positioned to go after, because AI is not good. I think there's a lot of talk in this vein, but AI is not good at replacing people. It's really good at helping them be better at their job. So like what that means for us, for instance, we don't have AI just fill out the form. We have it help a clinical expert basically turn it into an editing rather than an authoring exercise. It's really good at that. It's generally not good if you remove the SME from the equation. So like one counter argument to that would be, well, anybody can use ChatGPT, right? That's because the subject matter expert is you. When you're using it, you can figure out when it is hallucinating or when it's doing something that doesn't make sense and fix it. Just like that with abstractors, you can do the same thing. If you give out something that's a bad recommendation, then fine, they know better and they'll go look for it themselves. But the key is, I think the best use cases for this are going to be giving more power to the subject matter experts, whether they're in our field, this means nurses or doctors or MPs or PAs or people who have clinical expertise. Because it's really not about trying to remove them from the patient's journey, it's to let them spend more time on it. Like less time on documentation, catch things that they would miss otherwise because they don't have infinite time to read through all the notes, this sort of thing. Yeah. So to be really concrete about this, I think the place that AI has the best sort of area for impact on this is in the administrative section of the hospital, figuring out staff planning or predicting what patients will come in and when, or figuring out when there's a gap in care and giving recommendations for how to close it. So these sort of things I think are really powerful, very achievable. And also while we're in this sort of Wild West mode of things are changing really quick, that's also a relatively low risk, high reward place where you don't have to worry about somebody getting a bad diagnosis and dying. Like you're finding things that would not otherwise be found because people don't have infinite time. So I guess like another way to think about it, there's a patient's journey, the stuff that happens right after they walk out of the door, and there's a lot that happens right after they walk out of the door, as many of you will know. The focusing on that, I feel like, is where the biggest bang for the buck at this particular second in history will be. Now, I think as things mature, we'll be able to move up the time horizon and start getting in front of the patients and with the patients. And some awesome use cases like the ambient AI things that are happening right now are good examples of that. But right now, because again, it's still the Wild West, I think it's best for us to focus on these things where it's downstream and has much lower probability of harming patients.
Yeah, there are definitely unlimited areas of cool places to apply technologies like these. But I think one thing we've talked about in the last panel talked about is ensuring that you're in a place where you can encourage adoption based on the key stakeholders that will ultimately be the ones making the decisions. But I know we also wanted to save a couple minutes for Q&A. So maybe we can open it up to see if anyone in the audience has any questions.
A very interesting discussion. Thank you both. So just going back to the unstructured to structured data, right? That's a big space going beyond just the clinical records. Lots of adjacencies. Can you comment a little bit on like customer service, voice records, images, and whatnot, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think a lot of the things that I touched on are true in other industries as well. So the key here, just the fundamental, let me just sort of put my engineering hat on here. You can't get around in any capacity the requirement for there to be someone to create a truth data set that is trustworthy. And in the whole language realm, that can be really difficult. It's going to be extremely difficult to do that without humans in the loop. So the exercise that you need to do to figure out what's practical is start with a spreadsheet and figure out how much is it going to cost for me to build a training set and validate that training set and then validate what I'm building versus how much sort of juice is going to come out of that use case. So anything where the math works out on that then is great. Like for us, and I think you could probably translate this strategy to other industries, we found a spot where people are already being paid to go and do what is effectively a clinical labeling exercise. In our case, these data abstractors, they're reading through these notes and creating a structured data set, and today they're being paid to do that. So we figured out a way to build a product that could learn while they're doing it, to train the model so that we make money while we're doing it. Because again, with my AI like engineering hat on here, the thing that sinks companies in this space very often is the math just not working out. That, like, for instance, if I was selling this, if I didn't sell this as a service and I sold it as SaaS, then I'm going to have to go out and collect, 5,000 forms at least, which is going to cost several $1 million. And then only then can I start to train. And if you have to do all that work before you're making any money, it's extremely difficult just from a time perspective. And like, why would a hospital contract with you to go and like dive around in their EHR to do things until you've added value? Like, there are really difficult business challenges for that. So if you can find a way to get paid to do that work, and I think every industry has their version of data abstractors that are like hanging out in an office somewhere, filling out forms, like figure out a way to take that over and then make it better and turn that into profit for the business and find ways to interject AI into that process. I think you could do that on almost any industry.
Okay, yeah, great. Yeah, just one follow-up question. How do you handle sensitive data flowing back and forth?
Yeah, good question. So thankfully and not thankfully, like the HIPAA regulations in healthcare are very, very stringent. It's very clear what you need to do, and there's a lot of precedence for it. So for us, we just made sure very early on we hired people who knew how to make sure that we were doing that from the beginning. Other industries don't have as much regulation around it, so they have a little bit lighter touch around that, so it can be less clear to do it. But the main thing is just from the beginning, making sure that you know what's happening to the weights that are coming from the training, for instance, and just being really careful about where everything lives and who owns the data from the beginning is important in any industry. And I think that's the way to do it.
Hi, since this is healthcare, any thoughts on generative AI, hallucinations, responsible AI?
Yeah, good question. So, again, math engineer speaking, I think it can do many incredible things and is awesome, and I think is revolutionary generally. But also I think practically it does about 1% of what I think the sort of world thinks it can do right now. The key here is to just be really careful early on about testing accuracy and like trying it out in a real life scenario where you don't just care about a demo, you care about doing it 100 times and seeing how it performs. So let me give an example in our space. It's really easy to make a demo where you go and ask it to fill out a form for, like, one of the registries here is a American College of Cardiology registry called CAF-PCI. You can feed it the CAF-PCI definition and a bunch of notes, and it will very happily fill the form out for you. And it looks awesome. And then sometimes it is awesome. Like it'll give an explanation for why the patient is hypertensive or diabetic or whatever, and like correctly cite it in the note. And then 20% of the time it just makes it up and it's totally wrong. So the key is picking use cases where that's okay. If there's a subject matter expert that's there to check these things, for instance, in your use case, then it becomes a ROI question. Like, is a 20% error rate acceptable or not? And the only way you can know that is to try it and to measure it and make sure that it works. So the key here is making sure you pick things where the fact that there's going to be a large error rate, but that you can answer a huge, unknown, wide variety of questions, that's okay. So, and it could be a business model innovation. Like for us, it's ultimately we're responsible for submitting the form and we get paid per form that we submit. And so it's on our heads to make sure that it's accurate. And so we get to do all these internal proof of concepts and testing things. Whereas if you're on the hook for the quality, you better be scared of that at this point in history because no one knows how it's going to perform for every use case. So you've got to measure it yourself. So I'm a big fan of it. I think we use it internally to do stuff that is not filling out forms, but we help the data scientists figure out what the right document is to look at in the first place, for instance. Super good at that, super bad at filling out the forms, and that's okay. Like as long as you do the test and make sure that you understand it, then no loss in there. And I think it can do some incredible stuff.
I know that there's one last question. Very quick question, very quick answer. And if you want more answer, you can talk to Matt after the discussion because they're about to speak over there. So.
Thank you. Super insightful session. I was curious when you were talking in the beginning about some of the challenges with implementing AI, it was really around a change management perspective and a data collection perspective. With what we're seeing with generative AI and some of the advancements in AI, what do you think will be some of the challenges from a change management perspective and implementing AI solutions moving forward?
Yeah, so I think, again, sort of my experience building products for this, in the past, the hardest thing on almost any AI use case is getting it adopted. And let me give a real life story from to make this really concrete. Imagine for just a second that your job is one of these data abstraction jobs. Your job is to fill out forms that go off to some regulatory body to measure quality. Every day you walk into your office, you sit down at your computer, you open up the EHR on one screen, a form on another, and you fill it out. That's your job. Now Matt comes along and he's like, check this out. I've got this thing that like can make you do this in 5 minutes instead of 2 hours. Want to use it? You're paid hourly? What goes through your head when you get that pitch, right? The answer is, oh, I'm going to get paid 5% as much as I was before. That's scary. I'm going to find some way to torpedo this. And completely legitimate feeling. Everyone should feel that way. And the last thing that I personally want to do is run around and put people out of jobs in any form or fashion. So like, if that's the way that you get adoption, then you're not going to get adopted. People are going to try to kill it, and that's a problem. So what we did is this is sort of the business model innovation I was talking about. Instead of doing that, so we have the software, it does exactly that. You can do a form in a fraction of the amount of time you can do without the form. But the way we sell it is as a service, is a value-based contract. We're paid per form that we do, that we own from the start to finish. So what we do is target places where someone has quit and their only alternative is to hire, and they can hire us instead, and that's okay. We're not putting people out of jobs. And so the person who is out there buying us is the person who is responsible for submitting the registries, but they're not doing it themselves, as somebody on their team that's doing it. I think there's an analogy like that for every AI use case out there. And a good place to start is to find a way to do value-based contracting, like where you're paid for what you actually deliver. But that's not the only piece. Like, you have to also realize that the buyer might be losing their job or threatened or somehow. And so crafting your product to match that is, I feel like, the best change management path that you have. And in healthcare, there's this extra layer of, you need to make sure, like, there aren't many industries out there where if you screw it up, somebody might die, right? So like, there's some real life resistance to this that I wouldn't trivialize at all. So just taking the time to sit down with the people who are going to be using the software, buying the software, benefiting from the software, and championing the software. Those are like the 4 pillars that you need to go after in the healthcare setting. Make sure that they all are winners in it is necessary. So that's a wonderful question, because I think that's the biggest barrier for adoption generally is the change management bit of it. So That's a wonderful question.
Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Matt. I can always, Pete, you ask great questions because Matt his journey is so rich, and we can go on for a long time. But thank you again for taking the time, and thank you guys for hanging in there, even while you're hypoglycemic. So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Couldn't get close enough to the mics.
Yeah.